Queen Elizabeth making the journey from Balmoral Castle and arriving in Edinburgh, Scotland, thousands of people lined the streets to pay their respects to Britain's longest reigning monarch, who will be laid to rest in St. George's Chapel on the grounds of Windsor Castle next week. And as we are marking 21 years since the attacks of September 11th, I want to replay a very poignant moment in Queen Elizabeth's reign. This was when she broke a 600-year tradition on September 13th, 2001, and ordered the Coldstream Guards to play the Star-Spangled Banner. If you were an American and you weren't at home when there was an attack on your homeland, what it must have meant to hear that.
I can only imagine. First of all, what a classy, beautiful way to show Britain's support for America at, a time where we certainly were looking for support and we were all feeling very vulnerable here, I think, at home. But I have seen that video played now several times, and every time I get chills, every time I feel emotional. And I mean, I think about how it felt here in America right after September 11th, and we were all at least here together. But then I think about what you're just saying, Alicia. If I had been overseas and among those thousands of people there that were in front of Buckingham Palace, I imagine that there were Americans scattered in there. If I would have been there in that moment, I mean, I would have been a mess. It must have been so emotional for those Americans to hear the Star-Spangled Banner played, and man, to break 600 years of tradition, so incredible.
Yeah, and Joe, I mean, the Star-Spangled Banner it has been with us throughout our history. It's so important in that moment, though.
No, absolutely. I guess for me, I always make fun of when we report on the royal family. Hey, we fought a war to not have to worry about those people. And then something like this happens this week, and you see so many Americans, especially American leaders, pay homage to the Queen, that you understand that things do have an opportunity to change over time. Nothing is more the antithesis of America than the British monarchy. That's why we have a country. And then we fast forward a couple hundred years, and it's the British monarchy paying tribute to America, and the song that details that fight. I think there's something quite beautiful about that, and so I didn't know this had happened until we reported on it this week, and it makes me very proud that whatever that experiment was our forefathers created was so pure in its intention and so great in its result, that even the people we fought to make it happen honor it. And I think that's a big deal for not just credit to her, but also credit to us and what we created here.
Sean, your final.
Well, listen, I hadn't seen that before either, and I brought tears to my eyes. It was a really touching tribute, and maybe I'm just a softie and a crier. I don't know. but we talk about our friends. But I really think back to George Bush when he said, either you are with us or you're against us. Yeah. And it was nothing gray. Yeah. It was black and white. You join us or you are not with us. And I thought that clarity that came from our leadership at that time was profound, and I wish we had more of that today.
Yeah. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Queen Elizabeth II died today in Scotland, as you likely know, at the age of 96. She was the longest-serving monarch in British history. She was born in one world and died in another. It's not easy to maintain your dignity while living in the public eye. Most of us could not pull it off for an afternoon. Queen Elizabeth did it for more than 70 years. I want to ask you all, she wrote shortly before her coronation in 1953, whatever your religion may be, to pray for me on that day, to pray that God may give me wisdom and strength to carry out the solemn promises I shall be making, and that I may faithfully serve him and you all the days of my life. For the most part, she did just that, and that was not a small achievement given the period she lived in. The week that Elizabeth was coronated, Edmund Hillary, a British subject from New Zealand, a beekeeper, became the first man in history to summit Mount Everest. The achievement seemed symbolic at the time, Britain on top of the world. But in fact, Britain was already over, whether the British knew it or not. To this day, Britain claims to have won both of the 20th century's world wars, but together they destroyed that nation forever. After victory came humiliation. The empire evaporated, and along with it, Britain's self-confidence and ultimately its self-respect. It's hard to believe now, but Britain wasn't always a regional banking center / refugee camp. It was a real place with a history and a language and a culture and a genuinely remarkable people. A country in the North Atlantic the size of Alabama that somehow took over the world and ruled it with decency unmatched by any empire in human history. The British Empire was not perfect, but it was far more humane than any other, ever. It's gone now, barely even remembered. Queen Elizabeth II was the last living link to a truly great Britain. Today on social media, the usual ghouls celebrated her death. Quote, "May her pain be excruciating," a Carnegie Mellon professor called Uju Anya wrote on Twitter of the Queen. "May she die in agony." Various know-nothings in the media, including a columnist at The Atlantic and a couple of employees of NBC News, seconded that thought. The British Empire was evil, they wrote, apparently totally unaware of what came after it. And speaking of what did come after the British Empire, how, for example, did Africa fare after the British left? Let's see. Uganda got Idi Amin, who was a cannibal. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe and then became the poorest country on the planet under the racist lunatic Robert Mugabe. As of tonight, South Africa is still being run into the ground by an incompetent kleptocrat called Cyril Ramaphosa. So it's hard to see any of that as an improvement because it's not an improvement. Sorry, Atlantic Magazine. And now, of course, the entire continent of Africa has a new master, the Chinese government. China is the latest colonial power to dominate Africa. Its subjects will be pining for the British soon, assuming they are not already. In an ideal world, there would not be empires, no empires, only sovereign nations. But we don't have that world, and we never have had that world, going back to at least the Assyrians, 1400 years before Christ. In the real world, the one that we live in, strong countries dominate weak countries, and that trend shows no sign of changing. The very least you can say about the English is that they took their colonial responsibilities seriously. They didn't just take things, they added. When the US government withdrew from Afghanistan after 20 years, we left behind airstrips, shipping containers, and guns. When the British pulled out of India, they left behind an entire civilization, a language, a legal system, schools, churches, and public buildings, all of which are still in use today. Here's the train station the English built in Bombay, for example. There's nothing like that in Washington, D.C. right now, much less in Kabul or Baghdad. Today, India is far more powerful than the UK, the nation that once ruled it, and yet after 75 years of independence, has that country produced a single building as beautiful as the Bombay train station that the British colonialists built? No, sadly, it has not. Not one. So despite what they may be claiming on Twitter tonight, the British Empire was more than just genocide. In fact, the British did not commit genocide, except arguably against the Dutch during the Boer War. The British did give the world the Magna Carta, and habeas corpus, and free speech. They helped end the transatlantic slave trade, as well as the ritual murder of widows in India. The British Empire spread Protestant Christianity to the entire world. It published some of the greatest literature ever written, and produced the finest manufactured goods ever made anywhere at any time, including now. It was an impressive place run by impressive people. We will see many empires going forward, but we will never see one so benign. That's true. And because it's true, the people who would like to run the world in a far harsher way would like to make certain that you don't know it. And so they destroy the evidence that ever existed. Here they are tearing down a statue of a British philanthropist in the UK 2 years ago. Destroy the statue, erase the memory. That's why they're doing it. Slander the ruler, discredit the entire period she lived in. And that's exactly why they're attacking Queen Elizabeth tonight. Not because she was a bad person, she wasn't a bad person, but because she lived during a better time.
Eugene Nicholas writes, ancient Rome defined those who attacked the existing order without offering an improved alternative as, quote, barbarians, end quote. Second Chance writes, quote, a nation that forgets its past has no future, quoting Winston Churchill. Gorham writes, there's a reason almost the entire population of Australia was there on that day she visited here years ago. We all loved her over here. 16 upvotes. Stephen McDonald writes, as a Brit, this is the first time I've been on the end of Tucker Carlson's words. I see now why so many have difficulty listening to him. His words are harsh, but every single one of them are true. He is as honest as the day is long, and there are just too many people in the world who cannot handle that. I am not one of them, and I thank Tucker for not doing what everyone else does. He didn't virtue signal or just spend a few minutes fawning over our departed queen. He told it as it really is, and for that he has my respect and the respect of anyone else who deals only in truth. 804 upvotes, 89 replies, and this was 3 days ago. Robert Valance writes, thank you, Tucker. Excellent. Quote, It was an impressive place run by impressive people. And yet the Foreign and Colonial Office, or whatever it was called, was run by just 5,000 people, whereas nowadays there are hundreds of thousands of civil servants ditto the administration of the United States drained the swamp, achieving a tiny fraction of what they did. Larry Schmid writes, John Lennon returned his MBE, the member of the British Empire, to the Queen with a terse note. George Harrison refuses knighthood. I gave it a thumbs down here. One reply, Gerald Boson, they are both dead. No replies from me. Coquette Antigua writes, I weep deeply for the world. I am Nigerian and have watched an amnesiac world as though we Africans did not hound the white man out of our continent with the argument that Africa was our God-given land and we were adult enough to run our own affairs. Barely half a century down the line, and that continent is the most bastardized in human history by our own hands, and from that same continent our young are escaping in droves to what we implicitly conceded was the white man's, quote, God-given land, end quote, even calling the white man racist while doing so. I write this with my feet firmly planted on the continent of Africa, where I am resolved to stay back and in hope to help fix whatever extent I can. And I mourn the passing of this great regent who represents a far better world and time than we have ever seen. I pray the good Lord rest her soul. 94 upvotes, 11 replies, and this was done on September the 8th. Today's filming is September 12th and 13th. Last comment, Emmanuel Galdis writes, I am neither a royalist nor a monarchist, but I am tutored enough to appreciate the unique role the crown plays in British politics and society, and this political evolution did not come about by legislation, but by common sense people realizing the power of their conventions and the respect they hold for them. The British Constitution is still, to this day, an unwritten one. Those who hate upon the Queen personally are simply too ignorant of her role, what she brought to it, the way she has enhanced the role of the constitutional monarchy, and are also, frankly, too ignorant of the woman herself, blaming her for the evils of a past British Empire, which during her queenship simply melted away, with even a small island such as Malta, not much more than 300 square kilometers in all, being granted independence in 1964. When the Queen was asked about Australia opting for republicanism, the Queen simply said, quote, it is up to Australians themselves to choose, end of quote. So all this bottled up hate because of the past being directed personally at the Queen herself is a massive failure of the human intellect and heart. To wish the woman that she would die in excruciating pain is demonstrative of people who have lost any shred of humanity within them. I am not British, but I have heard the Queen speak on a number of occasions. She has always been simple, direct, yet so wise with it. In the same way, she carried the weight of the crown and wore it with ease. She never tried to make it about herself, unlike some Johnny-come-latelys who have thought the world of themselves because they got married to a royal. The Queen, ill lately and physically challenged, still stood up on her own feet, unaided, and received the resignation of one Prime Minister. It was a 40-minute meeting, Boris Johnson, and appointed the next Prime Minister to form a government, another 40-minute meeting, hours before she died. She served for 70 years, never putting a foot wrong, and no, she did not go in excruciating pain. She went in peace, because she was in God, unlike the haters who rent their souls and minds to the devil to use for his playgrounds. Henceforth she will be called Elizabeth the Great, and all the haters will fall by the wayside, anonymous and hate-consumed, all saliva and rage, knowing full well their incapacity to make even the most single smallest dent in the history of the world, indeed nothing even approaching a footnote. Lizzie, rest in peace. Biha, 229 upvotes, and this was also done September the 8th. I thank you, Emmanuel Gades.